Jim, how's it going?
Sean, how are you?
3 years at the club.
3 years now, man.
How do you feel about it?
It's hard to believe that the 3 years have went by as quickly as what they have. You know, it feels like we've achieved a lot in that period of time, and yeah, still kind of feels very early days, to be honest with you. It's been a bit of a whirlwind from when I came in, the relegation, the promotion back into the Premiership, the good success that we had last season, and obviously, you know, we're still got lots of football to play in the current season. So yeah, it's been a great 3 years. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and hopefully many more to come.
Yeah, you're one of the longest serving managers now since Jim McLean, which is hard to believe. Only Peter Hewson and Craig Levine have had longer spells. That obviously brings stability to the club, considering how many managers had been in the last few years. So how do you feel about that and the stability that it brings to you and your family as well?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you know, everybody understands the modern day game now. There's not a lot of time given to managers, but you know, I've had a really enjoyable time at United up to now. I've, you know, built a great relationship with the owner and the chief executive, and obviously met some great people behind the scenes, you know, and inherited a lot of good backroom team as well, who had a real knowledge about the club already. So they've all been a great help to me. I think stability for the club as a whole is really important, you know, given the chopping and changing that went on prior to me coming in. And I think you can see that a lot now in clubs, not just here in Scotland, but, you know, down in England as well. It's unusual for managers to get time to build something. And I still think we're at the early part of it. I still think we've got a lot of work to do to get it to where we want it to get to. But I think we're on a good path, and we're making good progress, which is the most important thing.
And having your family involved in it as well is a big thing for you.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, listen, I'm no different to any working parent out there. You know, everything we do is for the families, you know, to look after my wife and my children, and my wife has been a great support over the years, you know, for 20 years now. This summer we'll be married, which again is hard to believe. But yeah, she's came everywhere with me. She's been on that journey, as people like to say now, and you know, she's bringing the kids with her to the games. You know, we love being together at Tannadice. The supporters and the staff behind the scenes have always been great with Laura Jane and the kids, and making them feel very welcome. And you know, that's an important part of it as well, because they go through a lot of the difficult times with us, and when we've had the kind of success that we had last season and the year before, it's important that they're there to share in them moments as well.
Yeah, and James, your son, I know the two girls as well, but James is a big football fan, obviously looks up to you. Who did you look up to yourself growing up? Who was your inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, look, I had, you know, lots of role models in my time as growing up. I mean, I'm one of 5 children. I'm the second oldest in the family, and my older brother Jerry's 5 years older than me, and he was always one that I kind of looked up to when growing up and kicking the ball around the back garden. And he was a very good footballer himself. Played for our local Premier team. Played in the League of Ireland.
Who did he play for, Jim? Sorry.
He played for Kilkenny.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, in the later part of his career, but he was, you know, he's very good at that level. And yeah, he used to kick lumps out of me at times, as you can imagine. I used to always want to try and join in with him and his pals, playing in the local parks, and it certainly toughened me up and, you know, got me ready and prepared for what football entails.
Happy days. And see, growing up, like these days you look at the kids and they're in academy, 6-7 year old, and they kind of know that they're on a pathway. A little bit different for us growing up back home. At what stage did you think, I've got a chance here, I might actually get away?
I mean, look, I'm no different to any young person watching this interview now, in terms of the dream is to be a professional footballer. You know, my son James, as you mentioned there, he's 12 years old, and all he does is, you know, eat, sleep and breathe football. You know, if he's not watching it on the telly with me, he's playing it on the PlayStation, and obviously coming to all of our games as well. You know, he's probably my biggest critic, but also
I know that feeling.
A really, you know, good support as well. He loves football. He's desperate to know what the team is every weekend, and you know, he's very honest in his opinions and his critiques. And lately he's been sticking the knife in and telling me where I'm going wrong. So,
Are you taking that on board?
oh, sometimes I do. Yeah, he speaks a lot of sense. In fairness to him, but listen, in terms of the academy and the pathway now for children, you know, James is playing for a local team in Kirkintilloch with Rob Roy, and you know his dream is obviously, like all the other boys in his team, to try and one day break into that pro youth setup. And I think kids nowadays probably have it a lot easier than what we had it. I think in terms of getting into that professional environment that little bit earlier, understanding, you know, what it entails, getting that education quicker. I don't know what it was like in Dublin, you know, where you were growing up, but certainly down the southeast of Ireland, we're very much a Gaelic football county, big in our hurling and big in the Gaelic football, and soccer was probably a second or third choice for a lot of kids. But it was always my first love, it was always my passion. Played at a really good local club with Tramore AFC. We always done well in the national competitions as well, and I managed to get picked up for the Waterford team that played in the Kennedy Cup.
Yep.
We played in Limerick at 15 and 14 I was at the time, and then at 15 got asked to go to Celtic on trial, and there was a number of other clubs within that period of time after the Kennedy Cup that had wrote to us, like Newcastle, and a letter from Sunderland and some other teams down in England. But you know, I opted to go to Celtic, obviously, and I don't have any regrets whatsoever about it. It was a great 5 years education for me from 15 to 20. Was fortunate enough to make my senior debut there at 18. My old man came over on the Friday night to watch the game on the Saturday. It was actually against Dundee United, believe it or not.
Martin O'Neill was the manager.
No, sorry, Martin came in that summer actually.
I'll have to have a chat with Yanis about that. He gave me bad information.
No, Martin came in that summer, but it was John Barnes had been sacked.
Okay.
Kenny Dalglish and Tommy Burns were interim charge of the team, and they gave a number of us the chance to go and play at Parkhead. And I think Maurice Malpass would have been involved with Dundee United at the time. I think he might have been on the bench coming towards the latter stages. Stephen Thompson, obviously, an ex-teammate of mine from St Mirren, was on the bench as well. So yeah, they're great memories, and you know, I had a very good time there at Celtic. Met some great friends who are still friends of mine today, and that was the beginning of it, really, for me, I suppose.
Yeah. It was an amazing time though, and you moved then down to England, to Stockport, who at the time, I think people forget, you know, we're going back a little while now, forgive me, I know it's, you know, we're only a couple of years in the difference for the two of us, but just when you moved over initially, I often talk about my time. I moved over to the UK in 99, you were 97 I think. You've no mobile phone, you're writing letters home, or you're using the pay box to get in touch with people, a totally different time. And going on to Stockport were flying high in the Championship, I think, around 99. So when you moved to them, they had been in the Championship and were a strong team in League One. Obviously quite different these days, but how did you find moving to England?
I mean, look, I had the option to stay at Celtic for another 12 months. Martin O'Neill had offered me another year, but he was quite honest and upfront about the fact that it was going to be difficult for me to break into the first team. Celtic were investing heavily in the first team squad at that time, and you know, they were bringing in players at the likes of Neil Lennon and Paul Lambert, and you know, signing some really good experienced centre backs. And I was obviously a centre half at the time, and I knew myself deep down that I wasn't good enough to play in that team, and I felt that I had to, you know, at 20 years old, had only one senior game to my name, and a number of my friends who I was involved with the international setup were all playing first team football regularly down in England, whether it was in League One or League Two or in the Championship. So I made the difficult decision to leave Celtic and to go down to England, and Stockport County was the club that I chose. I had one or two options. I could have went to Bradford as well, but my wife and I liked being in the Manchester area, knew one or two of the lads at Stockport. John Daly was there actually, and that made the settling in process a whole lot easier. And I loved my time at Stockport. It wasn't the most successful time in my career, as you touched on there. County had just been relegated from the Championship. Carlton Palmer was given his first job in management, and we had a difficult spell. We weren't involved in the playoffs in league in the first couple of years, and then in my third season I decided just to move again. But loved everything about Stockport, everything about being in that Manchester area. Again, met some great people, and that's what this game does to you. And you meet lots of different people from different backgrounds, and yourself, you make some great friends along the way.
Yeah, and then you move to Scunthorpe and you get the success that you were craving. How was that?
Yeah, I mean, the Stockport days were great. I played over 100 odd games for them in the 3 years, but I didn't have a huge amount of options in England at that point, and Scunthorpe United was probably the best club that I had available to me. They were in League One, a relatively small club in that league. At that time, you had the likes of Southampton and Huddersfield and some really big teams kicking about in League One at that time. And we had great success. We were huge underdogs in pretty much every game we went into, and that was probably one of the biggest learnings of my career, and a dressing room that I still look back on today, even now as manager, and just remember how good the balance of that team was. Good managers. Brian Laws was the first manager there that signed me. Nigel Adkins then came in when Brian Laws moved to Sheffield Wednesday. But we managed to win the league and win it really comfortably. And then we had a year in the Championship, which was always going to be a struggle. We lost our best players. Billy Sharp moved on. Andy Keogh moved on. Joe Murphy, good friend of mine, Irish goalkeeper, moved on as well.
At the moment,
still playing now for Tranmere Rovers, and I watch his games a lot, and he's doing great. But so I mean, 3 years there at Scunny, and then got the opportunity to go to Huddersfield after that.
And how did you feel there? Were you moving around at the time, or were you commuting?
Yeah, we Manchester to Scunthorpe is a little over 100 miles, and it was too much to do on the day, so we moved over to the Yorkshire area. We bought a house near Huddersfield, actually, and my wife was still working in Manchester, so she was going in the opposite direction to me each morning, but it was a good halfway point for us. We stayed there for a couple of years and then actually moved back over to the Manchester area. But Huddersfield was great, a massive club, underachieving at the time in League One. Again, a lot of chopping and changing of managers. Stan Ternant, who was one of the most experienced managers in England at the time, had signed me, along with his assistant manager Ronnie Jepson. Stan didn't last too long. He was there about maybe 3 or 4 months, and then they brought in Lee Clark, and the club really moved on when Lee Clark came in, and they started signing some really big names, and guys like myself then kind of almost became squad players. So I knew after 4 or 5 months of signing a 3-year contract that my time at the club was going to be short-lived, and game time was going to be limited. And in fairness to Lee Clark, he was always honest and very upfront about the situation. And I was always quite honest with myself in those times anyway. I knew that there was better players in the squad that were playing ahead of me, and I didn't really have too many arguments. But it was a great experience. Terry McDermott came in as Lee Clark's number 2, and
that would have been after his time with Keegan.
I grew up a Liverpool fan. Me and my older brother watching all the videos of Kenny Dalglish and that time of Liverpool in the 80s when they were so dominant, and Terry McDermott played a big part in that. So it was great to be able to sit and have a coffee with a legend like that. So Kenny Dalglish gave me my debut at Celtic, and then his good friend Terry McDermott is my assistant manager at Stockport 6 or 7 years later. So it was fantastic.
And you had a loan spell then at Oldham before you decided to come back up.
I mean, like I said, Lee Clark came in, things were changing at Huddersfield, the club was growing, the the squad was getting better, and guys like me were on the periphery, and I was never one of those players to be happy to just sit around and not play games at the weekend. I worked hard during the week, and I felt that I needed something at the end of it to justify all that hard work. So, asked Lee Clark if I could go on loan. Dave Penny was the manager at Oldham Athletic, and it was, an easy decision for me. And I went there and enjoyed my time at Oldham. I had an ankle problem at the time, which meant game time again wasn't as often as I would have liked. But I don't regret the move at all. It was a good experience and a really good club.
Yeah, and then you had a year at Hamilton. When you come back up, Laura Jane moving back home.
Yeah,
I suppose home now for you, effectively. Well, will it ever be home?
It was always the plan when we moved to England. We had done 8 years down there, and we had 2 kids at the time, Ava and Millie. My 2 girls were born in England, and they were coming to that point where we were having to start thinking about school and what that all entails. And our plan was always to head back north and to see if we could find a club in the Premiership. And Billy Reid was manager at Hamilton at the time. My father-in-law is a close friend of Billy's, and he made the call for me. I went into Hamilton on a short-term deal. I think I signed just before the window had shut, actually, in the summer window, and I signed till the January on a short-term deal. Got back playing, was really enjoying my football, and then I had the offer from St Mirren. Danny Lennon was the manager there at the time, and I had a choice then to make that Christmas whether I stayed on at Hamilton or went to St Mirren. Both teams were struggling at the bottom of the table. It was a dogfight between which one was going to stay up and which one was going to go down. I opted to go to St Mirren, and thankfully we survived that relegation battle. Hamilton unfortunately went down, and I then went on to enjoy probably my most enjoyable time as a player during that spell at St Mirren for 5 years.
And success as well.
Yeah, I mean, success in terms of obviously, bringing silverware to the club for the first time in 25 years, I think it was. The last time that St Mirren had won the Scottish Cup. Never won the League Cup before in its history, so it was great to be captain on that day. And we had such a good dressing room there. We had Danny Lennon done terrific in terms of the recruitment, signed some really good experienced players, the likes of Stephen Thompson and Gary Teal.
Lee Maird as well, ex-United lads.
Maird's always there, Lee was a really important player as well, and on that cup run, probably not talked about enough, but Lee Maird scored a really important late goal against Hamilton in the early round of that competition, which ensured that we got through to the next round. And then obviously, the rest, as they say, is history.
Good stuff. And then your first managerial role, your player manager at Alloa. You've got a real job during the day. Yeah. You're trying to keep yourself fit. You're trying to play. You're trying to manage. How do you do that?
Well, it was a real eye opener for me. Like most professional footballers, you don't really think too far ahead, and you don't maybe plan enough for what life is going to be like outside of the professional life. As a footballer for 20 years, I was used to being told where to be and what time to be there, and everything was done for you during the day. And then you kind of fall out of that routine, and that's no longer there anymore. I had a couple of options at the end of the St Mirren contract to stay full time, but they didn't really make a lot of sense to me in terms of the financial side of it and the commitment that I was going to have to make. And I just felt that maybe going part-time and going down a different route was probably the best option for me and for the family. So Jack Ross was manager of Alloa, made me a really good offer, and I knew how professional a club Alloa was, and I knew how ambitious they were to try and get out of League One and get into the Championship. And to be honest, there was a little bit in the back of my mind that I knew Jack would move on at some stage, because I really backed him as a manager and as a coach, and I'd heard so many great things about him anyway. He was an ex-teammate of mine, Jack. He was always a sensible, level-headed kind of guy, and worked within the PFA. But I wanted to put myself in a club where, if the opportunity came up, when that manager does move on, that I would be in a position to maybe throw my hat into the ring. I'd done all my badges at that point. I had done up to the A licence, and I was just
we
about
did our beat together.
We did our beat together in Stirling, yeah, and Big Dinty was on it as well. And so, you know, that's how it panned out, really. You know, I was playing and I was a regular in the team, and then obviously we were doing really well. The St Mirren job came up. Jack Ross decided to go there, and then
how long was that? How long was that into your time when you left?
It was probably about 4 or 5 months into it.
Right. And were you helping with the coaching side of it? Or
I wasn't doing anything.
You
no.
just went in as a player?
No, I wasn't. I wasn't doing anything at all on the coaching front. Jack had Lee Sharp there with him, and he had Paddy Connolly as well. And there seems to be a Dundee United connection.
I was going to say,
everywhere I go.
And Aidan Connolly,
Aidan
his father,
as
obviously.
well, yeah.
Paddy played for the club as well. But
yeah.
And this is the first time you worked with Lee?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I didn't know Lee prior to going in at Alloa. He'd been a teammate of my brother-in-law when they played together at Clyde. But no, I just liked the way that Jack done things. I liked the Sharpie's role within that and in the dressing room. And Sharpie was really well liked by all of the players. And then Paddy Connolly was the experienced one in there who knew the league, knew all the opposition players. I think was a really good help to Jack, who maybe wasn't so sure about it. And yeah, when I took over the reins, I didn't make any changes behind the scenes. I had a great goalkeeping coach in Alan Fraser, who also has a connection to Dundee United, which is crazy because he was in the academy here when Jim McLean was manager. But yeah, I just tried to keep things ticking along when Jacko left. There was no need for me to go in and try and do anything fancy. We just kept training very similar, picked a similar kind of team. Initially I thought I might be able to keep playing. I had this thing in my head when I was younger that I was going to play till I was 40, and I always prided myself on being fit and looking after myself, and that was the hardest part of the part-time thing, and that's why I've got so much respect for the part-time teams. And I know what you're going through now at the moment with Montrose, but you've got a day job, you've got to try and make sure you're doing the work correctly to pay the bills, but at the same time you've got to try and find time to go to the gym or to go for a run, and it's very difficult to cram all of that in while you're trying to be a father as well. So yeah, I take my hat off to all of them part-time lads, and loved my time at Alloa. Great dressing room, was really, really lucky with the good work that Jack Ross had done in the recruitment process, and a number of those lads are still at Alloa now to this day, still playing, the likes of Scott Taggart and them. So
it might have been me as well, Jim. We had a chat, didn't we?
We did have a chat, and you turned me down.
It was just too far, mate. It was just too far. Trust me. So then you move on from Alloa, and you're into your first gig as full-time manager back at St Mirren. Obviously loved by everybody after your time there as a player. But you're going in now as the gaffer, so how do you approach? Obviously you're going to get that success, that respect straight away, but did you have any worries about managing players that potentially you've played with just a few years previously, or working with people that had been at the club when you were a player?
Yeah, I think the great thing about Alloa was I had a chairman there in Mr. Mulroney, who is the president of the SFA now, and he was very, very supportive. Financially, if there was nothing left in the budget, but I felt that there was a player that was available that we could bring in on loan that was going to make a difference. Like we brought in a young lad from Hearts, Dario Zanata. Yep. There wasn't money in the budget to do it. I went and asked him and sold it to him, and he backed me, and he made that happen. And Dario, was a really, really important player for us during that season. So I'd had great support from him, and I wasn't, overly sure about what the dynamics were going to be when you go into the full-time environment with, a board of directors and a chief executive and people in positions at St Mirren that, at Alloa were kind of volunteers and were very hands-off. So that took a bit of getting used to, and managing up the way you always hear that on the coaching courses.
What did you find was the biggest difference, or what did you was there something you struggled with more than
I don't think it was a struggle. It was just a different way of doing things, and Alloa was so professional for a part-time team, and I think there's a few amazing part-time teams in the country, and I think where you are right now, Montrose is certainly one of them.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
The job that Dick Campbell done at Arbroath, and now how Arbroath have kicked on again on the David Gold, and but going to that full-time environment is certainly different. There's a whole lot more to the job than just taking the team on a Monday to Friday and then picking a starting 11 for Saturday. You've got to meet with the commercial department, you've got to go and have regular conversations with the chief executive. There's a lot more kind of budget talk and a lot more planning for the future, whereas within the part-time teams it's kind of maybe not as forward planning. It's more about the here and now, and you don't really know who's available, who's coming out of full-time in the part-time. So but it was great. I had brilliant support. Gus McPherson was involved at the club at the time, and he was in almost a kind of a director of football role, although that wasn't his title, but that was kind of the way that I viewed him at the time. He was brilliant with dealing with the agents, because early doors I'm thinking I'm going to get in and I'm going to do everything, and you think you're Superman because you've got all this time, but the time goes by pretty quickly, and I don't have time to be sitting for hours on the phone to agents discussing contracts and talking to players. So Gus took a huge amount of that load off me, and then laterally Tony Fitzpatrick, when Gus left, took on that responsibility, and Tony was brilliant for me as well. And between us, I think we took the club forward. I think we made good progress during that time. We were competing for top six. We got to a couple of semi-finals in the cups, with the Scottish Cup and the League Cup, and the attendance was starting to grow, the season tickets were starting to grow, and I think that's the job as a manager, is to try and put a better player on the pitch, to make it more entertaining, and to gradually try and build everything else around that.
Yeah. And then Aberdeen come calling. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean,
the phone call comes in, and
look, it was. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a difficult decision at the time, because I felt so settled at St Mirren. I'd had that 5 years there as a player, gone on to 3 years as a manager. Had made such great relationships behind the scenes. There's so many people there that I didn't want to leave behind. And Jim Gillespie is another guy that probably doesn't get a big enough mention. When the Kibble came in to support St Mirren, they invested in the club, and there was a mutual arrangement there where the two could work in partnership, and Jim was hugely influential in terms of raising budgets to try and get better players. Simple as that. And so I had great support. I felt that we were really building something there, but I think when a club like Aberdeen, with the history of it, the size of the club, the facilities, everything about it, the fan base, obviously the playing budget was going to increase. It's a very, very big draw to turn down as a young manager. And I think you've sometimes wonder, should I turn this opportunity down and then look back on it in years to come with regret? But look, it didn't pan out the way that I had anticipated. It was short-lived. And obviously, it was a bit of a kick in the teeth in the end, with the way that the whole thing fell apart.
Do you think you learned more from that than the successes?
Yeah,
it's a common thing to say, but
I think you definitely do. Yeah, I think you tend to dwell on the negative moments a little bit more probably than what you would do in the successful times. But again,
one bad comment compared to the 99 positives.
Well, exactly. Yeah,
always bears a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot more.
But I'm always. I'm very self-critical. I don't. I've got a lot of good people around me, like my wife and family, and they're all very honest. You know what I mean? And they don't blow smoke up my backside or anything like that. They say it how it is, which is the way I like it. And but I was honest enough after that time at Aberdeen. I knew results weren't good enough.
Yeah.
I know as a manager that's what you're ultimately going to be judged on. I do think we've done some good things up there. I think we signed some really good players. I had good support with Darren Mowbray in the head of recruitment role. I've still got a really good relationship with the chairman, Dave Cormack, and every club I've been at, whether it's a player or a manager, I've always tried to leave on good terms. I don't take it personally. I know, a lot of people fall out with people on the way out, but I've only got myself to blame. At the end of the day, I wasn't getting the results that was required at a club like Aberdeen, and ultimately I'm the one responsible for that. But as I said, I still keep in touch with a number of people at the club. It was a fantastic opportunity. Unfortunately, whether it came too soon for me or whether I wasn't ready or not, I'll have to look back in years to come and think about that. But look, if that hadn't have happened at Aberdeen, then I wouldn't be in the position that I'm in today. And I'm really proud and delighted to be the Dundee United manager, and I feel extremely fortunate for the career that I've had, not just as a player, but in the 10 years as manager. I feel like it's all kind of been mapped out. That time in Aberdeen was great, but it was difficult because I was so far away from the family. My family is really, really important to me. I like being around them and being close to them, and especially when you've got a young family, you miss out on a lot of things. And my wife was, having to do the job at 2, we're trying to manage the house and do the school runs and all the clubs. You feel a little bit guilty being that far away. How
did you switch off? Because you talk about how important your family are and being around them. When you're not around them and you're up in Aberdeen, and you and Sharpie are together.
Yeah, I mean, I lived in a...
What do you do to switch off?
I lived in an apartment up there, and I was going to the training ground really early, like I do here now at United, and I was more often than not the last person to leave. I didn't have anything to rush home for because I was in Aberdeen, so I could be at the training ground till 8 o'clock at night some nights, and trying to pass the time and trying to get the work done, and then back to the apartment for a couple of hours and into bed, and then back up and do it all again the next day.
And trying to find a solution for.
Yeah, and then you feel a little bit guilty as well when you're on the phone to the wife. She's talking about how her day's been and trying to juggle all of that. So while I'm sitting in a nice fancy apartment in Aberdeen with my feet up. So listen, it was a learning curve. I think it was an opportunity that I couldn't turn down at the time. I think any other young manager in my position who'd only done 5 or 6 years as a manager to get that type of opportunity, it would have been madness not to give it a go. But it didn't work out, and that's where I always, I always think I'm quite a fortunate person, whether it's as a player or as a manager, because who gets the sack out of a big job like Aberdeen, and then not long after that gets the opportunity to come back into another big job like Dundee United.
So how did it feel? You get the phone call. Yeah. What are you thinking?
Well, there was another job available at the time in Scotland, and I had a conversation about putting my name in the hat for it, but I didn't think it was the right move for me at the time, so I was quite willing to wait. But then a couple of weeks after that, the phone call comes from Luigi Capuano, and had asked if I would be interested in having a Zoom call with himself and some of the board of directors and the owner, and sat on a call with them for over an hour, and I was blown away by what their ambitions were for the club and where they saw me within it. It was only going to be a short-term thing, try to come in and try and keep the club in the Premiership. But I felt at that time that it was just the right time for me to get back in, even though a couple of weeks before I had turned down another opportunity. So, I'm delighted I did. I'm delighted that I was able to prove to them in that short period of time that I was the manager to try and take the club forward. And it would have been very easy, I think, for the owner and for Luigi to go in a different direction after the disappointment of the relegation. But I'm glad that they saw enough in me during that short period to give me the responsibility to try and take the club back up.
So after that, you have your first 12 games, like you said, and did you feel at all that maybe it won't happen, or how did it come about where you kind of go, right, you're going to get the opportunity to go again? Was that discussed beforehand? Or were you ever worried about if we don't work out and we do get relegated?
Well, I just looked at it as a short-term thing. My focus was on just trying to keep the club up. I have to say, I'd heard lots of different things about the dressing room and the dynamics of it, and I was a little bit unsure about what I was coming into. There was a lot of experienced players there. There was a lot of guys that I knew on a personal level as well, and I wasn't sure how that was going to all pan out. But I have to say, all of the little rumours and the things that people were telling me, I didn't see any of that when I came in. You know, I saw a really good, positive group. I saw a number of experienced players that were extremely frustrated and disappointed with how the season was going, and in conversation with them I soon learned that, you know, they were all wanting what I was wanting and what everybody else was wanting. The supporters and the board was to try and drag the club out of the relegation position that it was in and try and maintain that Premiership status. So we fought extremely hard. We got that decent little bounce at the beginning where we got a couple of half decent results, but then, you know, things kind of unravelled going into the split, and we didn't do enough in those moments to get enough points to make sure that we stayed up in the league. So, you know, then it was relegation and what does the future hold, and again, you know, am I going to be a part of it or not? I wasn't too sure, but like I said, thankfully Luigi and the owner and the rest of the board gave me that opportunity.
You mentioned Luigi. Yourself and Luigi would have done a lot of work with the rest of the staff at the club during that summer to try and rebuild. A lot of big names that you mentioned obviously move on, and there's an expectation now. We need to get back up first try.
Yeah, I mean, look, with that expectation, obviously there comes an added pressure. When I came into the club initially, we had one of the oldest teams in the Scottish Premiership. There was no real sellable assets. There was a number of players that had great careers but that were on their way down now, if you like, and I'm sure, you know, they wouldn't mind me saying that, but you know, so we had a huge rebuild on. You know, we had to try and cut the budget, obviously, because you can't spend in the Championship the same as what you would spend in the Premiership. So we had to then try and recruit players that we felt were going to be good enough to get us out of the Championship at the first time of asking, and then good enough to go again to try and make sure we stay in the Premiership the year after. And a lot of those players came in on 2-year contracts. No player wants to take a 1-year deal. They don't like the thought of that, and it doesn't look as if it's a great deal of commitment on a club's front either. So we identified players that we could give 2-year contracts to that we believed had at least, you know, a good 2 years left in them. And, you know, the likes of Declan Gallagher and Kevin Holt and Louis Moult and Ross Docherty and all these guys who had been in and around the Premiership at one point or another. Some of them hadn't. Some of them had a point to prove and to show people that they could play at that level. And I think, you know, a number of them did, you know, given the finish that we had to the season. But, you know, going back into that Championship season, it was a really tough league. Every single game you go into, the expectation is there for us to win, and there's no pressure on the opposition. And
do you often think about what you are like as Alloa manager when you are playing against the bigger club in
without
the
a doubt?
Championship?
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt. I mean, look, the Alloa thing was brilliant, and it was a great grounding for me and a great start in management. But I did have that experience from, you know, playing against some of the lower leaguer teams and explaining that to the players about, you know, how excited these teams are going to be to come to Tannadice, where there's 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 fans, and they were going to raise their game. So we had to make sure mentally that we were prepared. I knew we had the best team on paper, but psychologically then we needed to make sure that we were respecting the opposition and that we had planned and prepared properly. And credit to Raith Rovers, you know, under Ian Murray, ran us really close, and they had some fantastic players as well. And you know, at one stage they were leading and we were in second, trying to catch them. But ultimately, you know, we had the best team. We won the league quite comfortably in the end. We scored a huge amount of goals. We had a great defensive record, and, you know, deserved to go on and win the league in the end. Yeah,
and you got to enjoy it with your family, like you said already. Some great photographs, and I was there on the last night myself, and it was a great to see everybody the relief, I think, and the buzz and the excitement of it all.
I think that's the overriding emotion, is definitely one of relief. You know, it's not a league title that you want to be over celebrating as a club like Dundee United. You know, it's different if Wraith Rovers had won it, or a Dunfermline or something, and I mean that with the greatest respect to those two clubs, because they've been down at that level for such a length of time. But a club like us, we shouldn't be in that position in the first place. So when you do go and get the job done and you win the league, yes, the supporters are delighted, and the scenes on the night when we got the trophy was brilliant and really memorable, and you know, delighted to have my family and close friends there to celebrate the moment as well. But ultimately, straight after that game, the very next day, you know, we know we're in the Premiership, and we know now that we have a huge job on our hands that summer to go and build a squad good enough to stay up.
What's the difference then between the summer beforehand, after relegation, and this summer? Because ultimately, I think it was 14 or 15 new faces come in that year.
Yeah.
What was the difference in the conversation between yourself and Luigi, or anybody else that was involved?
Well, the year we got promoted from the Championship, obviously, you know, when we had the relegation, we'd cut a lot of budget and tried to, you know, balance the books as any club would have to do. And then when you get promoted again, I'm chapping on Luigi's door saying, right, let's get the money back in the budget now. And obviously, you know, those discussions, listen, it was always very positive, and you know, the owner recognises the fact that, you know, we have to reinvest in the squad again. Obviously, we're going to get better prize money, we're going to get better attendances, and commercially we're going to do better. So all of that needs to be accounted for, and then we need to try and sign a better quality of player that's going to be able to go and compete against the top teams in the country. So, you know, I think we've done a terrific job last season. You know, I think we added real quality. We got some really good loan signings in, the likes of Lucas Stevenson, who I'm delighted came back again this year. He enjoyed it that much last season. Sam Dalby, you know, was a really good find for us. Will Ferry, you know, all players that played huge parts, along with all of the good players that had been a part of the promotion-winning team.
Yeah, of course.
And it was important to be respectful to them as well, because the likes of Gallagher and Holt and you know, Ross Docherty, when he was fit and was available, was one of the best midfielders in the league, and you know, Glenn Middleton, Louis Moult, you know, they all played such an influential role within that, and
they can be forgotten about though sometimes, I think, because
definitely,
you know, you do forget about it. And so, right, probably thinking we'll get safe, or make sure we're safe, and then the top six kind of comes around, and then the Aberdeen game must have been a highlight for you. You know,
I mean,
nothing to do with Aberdeen, but just to get that on you know, to get European football.
Yeah, it was. No, listen, the season last year, I think, you know, had we finished 9th or 10th and secured the Premiership status, I think that would have been acceptable for a newly promoted team. But when you're at a club the size of Dundee United, with the history and the expectation that's there, then I think we have to try and aim for, you know, something higher than that, and not be satisfied with just survival. So we did have in the back of our mind to try and push for top six. That was something that we tried to keep in-house. When I was out doing the media, it was always trying to talk that down, but we ended up being in and around the top six pretty much the whole of the season. And then when you start getting to the crunch time towards the end of the season, it's about, right, well, we've been here all the season. We need to make sure when the split comes round that we stay in the top six, and then potentially push on again for the European places. So the way it all panned out was remarkable. You know, credit to the team and the backroom staff and everybody involved. You know, I don't think anybody in their wildest dreams would have imagined the 4th place finish. To do it the way we'd done it on the last day, how, you know, dramatic it all was, and the emotion that was involved in it. It was just fantastic scenes, and you know, great celebrations, and you know, certainly something that we shouldn't take for granted and shouldn't be forgotten.
Yeah, probably need to enjoy them moments more.
Definitely.
A shorter summer then, because obviously with European football coming about, but you're back to getting 14. I don't know, again, something similar to the year before, another 13 or 14 new faces in, and a shorter period before you're back involved. But you've got European football to look forward to.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we had a little less than 3 weeks off for the summer, and it's nowhere near enough for players to recover after a long, grueling campaign.
So that must be a worry for you.
Yeah, but it's not enough time for a manager. It's not enough time for the people that run the football club to actually have to try and get all these things in place in terms of, sorting out the pitch in time for the first friendly game or for the first European competitive game, and commercial departments. There's so much that goes on within the football club that a month is nowhere near enough time to get prepared for that. And then
you don't know where you're going to be playing.
Well, and then throw into the mix then obviously that you need 14 new players. So those conversations are ongoing. It's not like we only start talking to players when the season's over, but we were very well prepared going into it, and we had a number of deals that were really, really close. But again, it's not a position that we want to find ourselves in too often, because that type of rebuild can be very risky. There's a lot of things that need to fall into place, and ultimately I think we've done a really good job with the players that we brought in. We reduced the average age of the squad. We're now running with the youngest average age in the league. I think that inexperience has probably shown at times during the course of the campaign, but I certainly think we've moved the club in the right direction again, albeit we're not showing that in our league position, but certainly within the club, we've got a plan in place. We know where we need to strengthen, we know the areas that we need to improve, and it's a continual work in progress. I think every single club in the world goes through little bumps in the road along the way, and you spoke away back at the beginning of the conversation about stability. Us behind the scenes are very much on the same page. Myself, the owner, the chief executive, the head of recruitment, we know exactly where we need to improve, and we know how we're going to get there, and ultimately it's our job and our responsibility to make sure we do that.
Yeah, you talk about the young lads, obviously having a much younger squad. The easiest thing for everybody else to say is a lack of experience and game management and all these kind of buzzwords or cliches, but how do you manage that, in that there's a fine line between allowing somebody to walk through a difficult time or to pull them out and protect them? How do you decide what's needed? And the obvious thing is late goals and maybe seeing out games in a better way. Apart from the obvious stuff that you would do on training ground, what are you thinking, or what goes through your head when you're talking to the lads about that?
Yeah, I think obviously conversations with the players are really important. I lean heavily on my backroom team. I've got some good experience there with the likes of Dave Bowman and Paul Mathers, and obviously Sharpie's been with me over the 10-year period, and I trust what those guys have got to say, but ultimately I'm the manager and I've got to make those difficult decisions and then believe in what I'm doing is the right thing. You don't always get it right, and when you get it wrong you got to hold your hands up, but you're right in saying when those young players are going through difficult moments, it's finding the right times to take them out and to protect them, and sometimes let them play through it, and sometimes let them try and come out the other side, because they're the kind of life experiences that they need. So it's been there's been lots of challenging moments this campaign, but I think the last minutes of games, I think we've conceded too many goals. We've dropped so many points from winning positions, but we still believe there's a lot of football to be played. The season is not over for us. We know we've given ourselves an uphill task in terms of the top six, but we're still very much in the fight, and then we've got a quarter-final in a couple of weeks to look forward to against Falkirk, a team that we beat a couple of weeks ago 3-2. So it's going okay is what I would say, but we're not obviously delighted with the league position.
Yeah, I think just touching on what you said there about the younger lads, I mean, I think about Ryan Gold, John Suter, just two in particular, that during that time that we had, they needed to be kept out. They needed to be taken out. It wasn't always, people sometimes forget, your memory deceives you and you think, they were always, it doesn't always go like that.
Yeah.
And then you look at the fact that, well, you're conceding late goals, but you're putting yourself in positions to win games in the first place. You know, you're not scrambling to get a draw or, for stuff like that. So you look at the positivity of the cup, the fact that we're on a cup run, one game away from Hampden. Obviously, we mentioned earlier your success at St Mirren. You know what it's like to be, to lift a trophy at a club that doesn't do it regularly. The excitement that must be, but obviously brings a pressure as well. But for me, it's more of an excitement than anything else.
No, definitely. Look, I mean, I think it is sometimes really important to look back on what we have done over the last 3 years and remember some of those difficult moments. And we've had some difficult moments this season already, but I think those difficult moments can work in a positive in the future, because those players that we're talking about will have the experiences of what they've been through. Losing those late goals, hopefully in the weeks and the months and the seasons to come, they'll be better equipped to manage those situations better, because scoring goals hasn't been a problem. We're in the top 6 teams in the country for scoring goals, but the reality is we've conceded far too many, and that's something that we'll continue to try and improve. We've tried to give opportunities to the likes of Sam Harding, to Owen Sturton, to try and get those guys, playing in the Premiership and raise their profile as well. The player trading model that we're trying to introduce to the club as well. We've had good success already in January there with Nico Muller going for a significant fee. In 3 years we've won the Championship, we've finished 4th in the Premiership, we've enjoyed a taste of what European football is. And right now, we're disappointed. We're sitting 7th in the league table, but we're got a quarter-final of the Scottish Cup to look forward to. As you say, one game away from the potential of playing at Hampden in the semi-final, and we know that anything can happen in those types of games. So, yes, it's important to look at the bits we can do better, but it's also important to remember the good things that we've achieved in this short period of time.
We jumped ahead there. The European stuff. I mean, the first time we've won a tie since the 90s. What was it like? I mean, the atmosphere at home obviously brilliant, but the travelling support, and I think I listened to you talking about you went for a walk on the day of the game. Yeah. And you see the chaos and the great scenes of the fans. To be there. Surely everybody wants more of that. But how did that make you feel when you went there? Were you expecting that, or?
Well, listen, like I said, I knew before I came to the club, the size of the support and, the infrastructure that's here and the history of the club. And, look, we've got a generation of supporters that have grown up during that Jim McLean period and that are used to their team competing for titles and cup competitions and European football. And, of course, we'd love, to go back to those days and to bring that kind of success to the club, but we understand how difficult it is now in the modern day game because of the financial gulf between a club like ourselves and some of the other teams that we're competing with. But it doesn't mean we can't compete and we can't keep trying to close that gap on the teams above us. But the European stuff in the summer was absolutely amazing. It was my first time as a player or a manager at club level being on that type of trip and being involved in that type of competition. So, my family drove, would you believe, from Glasgow to Luxembourg. Nice. And stopped off in a few different cities along the way. And they just had such an amazing time in the square in Luxembourg with all the Dundee United supporters. We went in as a staff as well to have a look at what was happening and to see all the scenes, and it was incredible, and it was really motivating actually. And for the players to see that travelling support, and for the new guys in particular, the guys that haven't played in Scotland before, to actually see what type of club they've came to, it was amazing. So the trip to Luxembourg, the trip to Vienna was absolutely brilliant. The home ties were amazing. That one against Vienna, I mean, that's one of the ones that I keep thinking back to, and so much disappointment and regret, because I thought we were good enough on the night to win the game, and to go out on penalties the way that we did was a real tough pill to swallow. But again, it's experiences, and hopefully it will stand us in good stead for the future.
Yeah, so talking about experience, we're nearly done. 10 years managing, what's the biggest lesson or the biggest lessons that you think you've learned over those 10 years?
I think you've got to always try and learn. I think regardless of what industry you're in, I'm always trying to make myself better, and always looking at different coaches and listening to interviews, and always trying to learn and improve. And whether that's tactically or different formations, different systems, trying to introduce modern training sessions for the players to try and engage them as well. Always just trying to move forward with the game itself. Is there anything that
stuck from the start? Is there anything that you still think about, when you're at Alloa and you think?
Yeah, well, I think you always kind of think back to the dressing rooms that you had success in, and I think the Alloa one, with the experience that we had there and the good work that Jack Ross had done and the recruitment side of things, and I think that's the biggest thing to any young manager out there that wants to get on in the game. You'll live and die by your recruitment, and that's why I put so much work, and it's so time consuming. I spend hours and hours and hours every week watching players on the laptop, and working with my recruitment team to make sure that we're identifying good talent that we think can bring the club forward. And look, it's difficult to get every single one of those right, but I think over the piece, if you can get 70% of them right and they're successful, then I think that brings success to the club. So I think that's probably the biggest learning curve for me. It doesn't matter what level you're at, whether it's League One with Alloa or whether it's the Scottish Premiership right now with Dundee United. The recruitment is the most important part of the job, and we work tirelessly here. Myself and Ross Goodwin are in constant contact. We're looking across all markets. We look in the Scottish market, the English market, all over Europe, and further afield as well, to try and find players that suit the Scottish Premiership, that can fit into our wage structure, and that are going to make us better. And that's what we'll continue to do.
Happy days. Good luck for the rest of the season. Thanks,
Sean. Thanks very much, Paul.